Doing so many, I think one a day. Conscient podcast episode 77. I wasn't sure which one it was because I'm doing a lot. I'm with Seth Klein. It's nice to meet you, Seth.
In person, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a follow-up conversation because episode 26, there's a nice train. We're actually on our way to Trout Lake in Vancouver. Episode 26, you talked about the book, A Good War, which we don't need to go over again because I invite people to listen to that episode. But I wanted to have a follow-up conversation with you because you've helped us at scale get things going, and you're at the heart of the climate emergency movement in Canada, I think, with the Climate Emergency Unit. And we were just talking about some of the achievements so far of the Climate Emergency Unit, and I'm interested in the arts and cultural side, but also more broadly, what has happened in the last few months and where do you see things going? So where do you want to start?
Maybe I should start by saying a little bit about the model
Okay.
that we use. So the idea of the Climate Emergency Unit is to try to advance true climate emergency ideas, policy options. And the model is to convene coalition tables of the willing who want to collaborate and put some political muscle behind these ideas. So we organize certain things on national campaigns. We organize provincially, and we organize sectorally. So scale would be an example of our involvement in a sectoral coalition table for arts and culture. But we've tried to do similar kind of sectoral organizing among faith groups, we're initiating a new one for food and farming, hoping to initiate one among first responders.
Okay.
Part of the idea with these sectoral tables is to mobilize people from outside the traditional environmental sector, increase the pool of voices. Then we also, sometimes we bring coalitions together on a particular idea. So for example, one of the ideas out of the book is the idea of banning fossil fuel advertising. And we convinced CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, to take the lead on that one, building on the legacy of health groups and the campaign to ban tobacco advertising. And they agreed that was a great idea and a great fit for them. And so just now we're in the process of bringing together a national coalition to collaborate on that idea that will bring together, we hope, arts and culture groups, health organizations of and for young people, because so much of this advertising is targeted to them. Sports organizations, because so often the sponsorship is fossil fuel sponsorship of sporting activities, sporting events. So that's just taking shape. Here in British Columbia, we convened a coalition table that's now called the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. There's 20 plus organizations that have come together and to collaborate on how to press the provincial government into true climate emergency mode. It includes many of the province's leading environmental groups, but it also includes a couple unions, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and that coalition table's really done a good job of, I think, defining what does a true emergency agenda actually look like in our province. And so all these groups came together, and early on what we did was collectively wrote a document that was a call to the BC government to truly confront the climate emergency, and it lists 10 actions of what it would look like. That document became an open letter to the Premier and government that has now been signed, well, as of a couple days ago, by over 280 organizations representing well over 1 million British Columbians. And you've got all of these groups now. It's a very dispersed campaign. You know, it's not a branded campaign. Every organization who's part of it can just take hold of it and make it their own. And so whether you are the Wilderness Committee or Lead Now or Stand or Dogwood or the David Suzuki Foundation or My Sea to Sky or the Georgia Strait Alliance, you're organizing and mobilizing your membership base on the same 10 demands. And the government is hearing about it over and over and over again from all kinds of different quarters. The entire BC First Nations Leadership Council, so the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the BC AFN and the Assembly of First Nations have sent their own letter to the Premier saying after this summer we surely need a genuine climate emergency plan and endorsing the same 10 actions. So I think there's a model there. The idea is, you know, all these groups do their own thing and they all have their own constituencies, but there's some coherence that we're all calling for something very similar, and the government is getting clarity that collectively we represent a lot of people, and if they don't do these things, there will be consequences, and if they do these things, they can be rewarded. There's a true base there. And clarity about the checklist, the lens through which the actions will be governed. I think the same model could and should be used by Scale. To have these arts and culture groups come together, identify a shared vision, a shared set of actions that together constitute a true climate emergency agenda for the arts and culture sector. That's step one. And then agreement to jointly campaign, all with your individual constituencies, on that declaration, on that list of actions, so that if you are the federal minister of culture or a provincial minister of culture, you keep hearing over and over again from all of these different groups that are part of your portfolio, this is what we want.
Well, that's a good model, and for the listeners, I'm just going to identify the day because it's Tuesday, November 2nd, and we're in Trout Lake Park in Vancouver, and I'm with Seth Klein. And SCALE, the Sectoral Climate Arts Leadership for the Emergency, was set up to do that kind of work, but we have to get all on the same page, and of course COVID got in the way of our getting together in person, but it has not stopped our talking to each other, and I think our coalition is growing, and I appreciate your suggestion.
By the way,
on a method to get to more impact.
By the way, you said the date. It's November 2nd. It's the 85th anniversary of the CBC today. Did you know that?
No.
It is.
Congratulations, CBC.
I only know that because they mentioned it on the radio this morning. But another campaign I am hoping that we will initiate soon, and I would hope, it dovetails very much with SCALE and your base. A campaign for the CBC to do its job in a moment of emergency.
You've been talking about that for a while.
Yeah, because, the CBC was formed 3 years before the war. Mm-hmm. It played a vital role in the war, mobilizing us. The voice of Lorne Greene, everyone listening to every night. All those documentaries that the NFB pumped out in the war, it seemed like 95% of them were narrated by Lorne Greene.
Yeah.
When I think about the present, like you probably, all across the country, we all have our CBC morning radio shows that we listen to, and we get every hour the business and the sports report. I want a morning climate emergency report that tells us how this fight for our lives is unfolding at home and abroad every morning.
Well, I've noticed that they're doing something for COP, which is a cross-platform, which is good.
It's been very good.
Yeah.
But it's too... Well, in some ways, it models what we need. They're showing us some good reporting right now, largely good, not consistently great, but pretty good. Except, it's sort of classic CBC. They do this in these spurts around an event like COP. And we actually need to normalize it. It needs to be year-round.
Well, the message is out there. I know it's in your book, and I know you've been advocating for it, but what's the missing link? I guess CBC leadership has to make a decision.
Yeah.
They have the resources.
They have the resources. They have to overcome this this impulse, or really this fear, of being perceived as, unobjective, or a whiff of advocacy is the language I've heard them use. And this is the line I use in the book, that, we want them to be factual, we want them to be science-based, but in the face of a civilizational threat, you pick a goddamn side.
Yeah.
And you don't feel ashamed about that.
Yeah.
And in the war, if they hadn't, Canadians would have been rightly appalled.
Well, I have to say that I don't feel like the arts and cultural sector that I know well is in climate emergency mode yet.
No.
And I think it's coming, though, because young people are getting involved, and some very senior people in the community are mobilizing, like Soulpepper Theatre is a good example.
Yep.
But we need that replicated across the country. And I think it will happen when people step up and just get the work done, right? And don't ask for permission, don't ask for special funding. I mean, you can ask for funding, but just get on with the work, which is what the green sessions were about. You spoke at them in June.
Yeah.
So I feel that it's coming, but it's slow.
It is coming, and you're right. You need to just get on with the work. But I do think we should be insistent on those with resources, namely government. Artists are workers, and they need to make a living, and we need them, and we should pay them properly. Just like anyone else we enlist in this historic moment.
I hear you. Well, it's raining pretty hard here. It was.
Yes, this is classic Vancouver. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's fine. I love the sound of rain, especially now. This is my first umbrella recording, so you get sort of a little bit of an echo from the reflection of the umbrella. So that's kind of a nice sound. So we were talking about arts and culture just a minute ago, and you were saying that you're doing you have some points of contact with arts and culture. Did you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, I did a little play with Marcus Youssef,
Okay.
Formerly with New World Theatre out here in Vancouver, and it's gotten performed a few times. I've zoomed into some couple mural reveals with this climate school climate mural project in Toronto that Andre Forsyth has been heading up. So I joined them when they had a beautiful reveal in Oshawa. They partnered with Green Jobs Oshawa for a huge mural in the center of town there. That's just wonderful, really on theme. And people continue to share songs with me, related to the theme. And I have to say, after 22 years as a policy writer, this was the first book this book I did that came out a year ago. It's certainly the most creative thing I've ever done. And now that I've been out with the book for a year, continuing to do a lot of book events, about 3 a week, and I've joined many writers' festivals, including just last Saturday in Wakefield, Quebec. I've become very appreciative in a way that I wasn't before of the power of a good story.
Yeah.
When I landed on this framework of this structuring the book around lessons from the Second World War, I knew it was a helpful framework to me to structure the book. I knew it lent itself to the inclusion of some good story, in the book, and I knew that it jolted my own thinking into emergency mode. Made me look at this material with fresh eyes. But what I've only come to really appreciate being out with the book is how resonant this 80-year-old story remains with so many Canadians.
And traumatizing.
Sorry?
And traumatizing.
Yes, I mean, for those who, these are mainly people who weren't alive at the time,
right,
and yet who still have a connection to the story. Like, having now done events with many different kinds of audiences, the fun part of the book talks is that whether or not the audience is a political audience, or business people, or labor people, or architects, or journalists, or farmers, they've all got an institutional connection to this war story. And there are people in that story who are important to them and their sense of purpose as both leaders and as an organization. And I get to make a little mischief with each of these audiences. I get to say, these people, I pull a little bit of the story that's relevant to them. You know, so if it's farmers, there's a piece of the story for them. If it's journalists, as we were just talking about, there's a piece of the story for them. And I get to say, these people who are important to you, who you admire, and who did something magnificent at a historic moment of challenge. Well, here we are again.
Yeah.
And who do you want to be?
Yeah.
And that's fun.
Yeah. Well, I've heard some critique of the parallel between World War II and the climate emergency. And, you know, I think you probably agree that it's not a perfect comparison, but in terms of scale, if you want to use that word,
yeah,
it certainly is.
Yes, it's just that comparison to speed and scale.
Well, sometimes I insert excerpts from other episodes, so I'll actually play right now a little excerpt from somebody who was talking about they would have preferred a more peaceful comparison, like a successful peace movement as opposed to the war. Mm-hmm. I'll just give them a bit of time here.
Well, I thought there were some really valid points, that he made, around the fact that we don't have an anthem, for the climate emergency, and in questioning, why that's the case, and making a case for, a call to arms, essentially, of the arts, stepping up to the plate. I do get alarmed, though, when I do hear, and increasingly so, around using war language in terms of the climate emergency. And we had a national summit here and on the climate emergency last year, before the COVID lockdowns. And that was the dominant language. And the thing is that that language is a command and control language. And it doesn't come from a place of empathy. It doesn't come from a place of togetherness or, Claire in the film Refugeum talks about in times of volatility, she refers to Plato, in times of volatility, that mankind descends into tyranny. That's war language. I find that highly problematic. I think when we can focus on social cohesion, social inclusion, and thinking about justice, I think we're appealing to a different heart, within our humanity, and so and that comes from a lot of this is First Nations knowledge, and thinking about the eternal now, that we're thinking about our ancestors, past, present, and emerging, and thinking about their safety and their well-being and their prosperity. So I see what Seth is saying, like he's giving an example of a time in which there was, a great mobilization of the arts. And I understand about this dystopian, sort of trajectory that a lot of the arts are moving towards. But World War II, we didn't have social media, and we didn't have, people constantly connected, and the world was, vastly different.
And so it's good that people are reacting, right, and responding to your book and thinking about it and making up their own mind on what they believe to the climate emergency is. But what's undeniable is that we're in it, and that it's not going away. And I think the climate emergency, has done really important work, not only in the arts and cultural sector because of what you've done to help us move forward. The collaboration of artists and activists is a really dynamic one.
Yes.
We learn from each other and we work together. But I think the idea of creating a coalition around not just shared values, but shared ideas, where we want to go, that's very powerful.
Yeah, not just values, but concrete policy actions.
Yeah.
And the power to me of the metaphor is that it keeps us in non-incremental emergency mobilization mode. Okay. The challenge we all face, and I know that you are experiencing this at the scale table, is that the path of least resistance is always to default to a more comfortable incremental place.
Yeah. That's human nature in a way.
Yeah. So
it's also very Canadian.
It's very Canadian. So that's what those of us in the unit are trying to do. We're trying to be the ones at these different tables saying, stay focused on ambition. And because for me, the point of that war metaphor as well is that it's a reminder that to truly achieve speed and scale, we need something state-led. So while it's all very good to have something where the arts and culture community starts to define what climate emergency means internally for artists and for your own operations and practice, until those in political leadership are being harangued by your agenda, it's incomplete.
Well, the theme of this season, I didn't tell you about this, but it's called radical listening. And it's something I've been trying to do because I think radicality is necessary now, but also listening very carefully to the people around us and to knowledge that we might not have really understood in the past. I'm thinking about Indigenous knowledge, but other types of knowledge. So that's, to me, a bit of a contradiction, because if you're in an emergency mode, how can you slow down and listen?
Yes.
You can actually walk and talk at the same time, as we're doing right now.
No, but you're right to name the tension. And I actually, it's funny, I speak to that tension in the chapter on Indigenous leadership in the book.
Okay.
This, the tension between trying to move at the speed of trust, which is often not very speedy.
Yeah.
Particularly when doing coalition work, and yet feeling the panic and the urgency of this moment. But I remember Cal Salem in the book, who's a local Indigenous leader from Squamish Nation here. When I asked him about that tension, he just said, just start.
Yeah.
And it has to be okay to make mistakes.
Well, that's also the advice we got when we started Scale, because we wanted to consult everyone and make sure everybody's on the same page. And after a while, we decided to start and to just adjust as we go.
Yeah. You don't need everyone at the table initially. And at a lot of these tables, so again, at the unit, we talk about these being smaller coalition tables of the willing. In any kind of political organizing, there's always this tension between you have kind of radical and ambitious demands, which fewer people can sign on to, or soften them a bit in order to maximize the number of participants.
Yeah.
That's a legitimate, there's no right or wrong answer on that. But in our organizing, we default to the former. our role is to try to keep people focused on emergency. And if that means a list of demands emanating from a coalition table that not everyone we wish could sign on to, that's okay. They'll come around when they're ready. Let's start.
And they'll give you feedback in due time, and things can be adjusted, but yeah.
Well, or even, I was mentioning earlier about our BC table. These 10 demands we came up with for BC are very ambitious. They're true climate emergency actions. There are a number of organizations around our own table that, for whatever reason, couldn't sign the open letter. There are a couple unions who couldn't sign it yet. They were like, they have elements of their membership who just aren't ready yet. And yet they remain active participants at the table, supporting it in other ways. So you just got to stay flexible with this stuff.
And on mission, I guess.
On mission, and don't wait for perfection.
Yeah.
Anytime organizing waits for perfection, you never launch.
Yeah. Well, we're coming back to your home here in East Vancouver. Is there anything we didn't talk about? It was a pretty nice conversation that you wanted to say.
Covered a lot of territory.
Okay,
I feel like I've shared what arts and culture and scale-related insights I can think of.
Well, for now, anyway, maybe we'll have a update every 6 months or so. I think that would actually be a good thing, because your own thinking is evolving as you get feedback and as the climate emergency unit evolves. And I think in 6 months we'll have the cultural declaration that Anthony Garofalo-Sauget is working on with others, and we will be in a really good place to start to do some of that influencing through art, through advocacy, through all of those things in parallel. Because some people will want to do it through their artistic works. Others will want to be, campaigning, and it's all good as long as people have some common sense of purpose.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, and these things you do learn. That was true of the mobilization in the war, by the way.
Inevitably.
They were learning along the way. The first couple of years it didn't quite work. And interestingly, I'm going to get distracted, but part of the evolution in 1941 was that they pulled leaders from arts and culture into the mobilization exercise in a way they hadn't before, particularly John Grierson.
Yeah.
It is all new for me. I mean, I spent 22 years with a policy think tank, conducting and overseeing research. This whole universe of campaigning and political organizing is new to me. And the other thing that's been new and fun, I've over the years I've met with political leaders about different policy ideas, but it's always been, those engagements were always just talking to their heads about facts, and arguments and figures. And with this climate emergency and with the book, creates this opening to talk to their hearts and their heads and engage them about who they are and what's important to them and how do they want to be remembered. Totally different conversation.
Well, I've been 21 years a bureaucrat, a cultural bureaucrat, and I'm also learning how to be, an activist and an advocate, and yet we call upon our expertise, right? What I know is arts and culture are very powerful, and they need to be in people's lives, and meaningful, and not isolated where the artist is, what you were saying at the beginning of this conversation about coalition. It's really being at the table. It's being part of a large movement, as opposed to isolated and, distance from the power of a collective voice.
Yeah. Well, all of those years you were at the Canada Council, when you're the funder, that's a totally different relationship to being, at a table of equals trying to figure out a way forward and trying to disperse the leadership.
Well, people with keen ears will remember this crossway from the beginning of our talk about 30 minutes ago. So I'll stop here, Seth. Thank you very much for your time, and we will talk again, and I hope people will check out the work. Like, I've been attending some of the sessions, and I encourage people to do that. There was a really good post-election debrief you guys did, and recently how to lobby federal politicians. There's lots of workshops and opportunities for people to get involved, which I encourage people to do.
Thanks.